Welcome to the channel, everyone. We have Fabio Marciano with us today. He is at F Marciano on Twitter. Fabio, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jack. Excited to be here.
So your tagline on Twitter is "Money ain't wealth." And before we get into what that exactly means, I like to start off and just ask everyone, what was your relationship with money growing up?
That's a good one. You know what, to be honest, I just never thought about it. It was just one of those things my parents handled, things like that. I had a good life growing up, so like there are no complaints and things of that nature. But it wasn't like I knew like about income and expenses and how much things cost, etc. Occasionally be like, you can't afford that, or no, that type of thing. But it was just, I didn't really need much as a kid. It was like comic books and baseball cards and things of that nature, or candy at the store. My dad would hand me money after church, and I'd go buy the paper, and maybe I'd buy a comic book and a candy bar for my sister and I, things like that. But it wasn't until like college where you like kind of understand it's like, hey, it's expensive to go to school, and it was during one of the mini recessions. You're like, oh, okay, like, all right, I need to get a job here to kind of help out, and that was on me. I wanted to do that.
Mhm. So there was a tweet you put out, and that really stood out to me. It was talking about, I think when you hit rock bottom at like 25, you talk about you being broke and
Yep.
some books that changed your life. So what happened between you graduated college and 25?
So for me, when I turned 21, graduated college, didn't really have a job. So I was waiting tables. It was a tough economy, like a mini recession back then. And so got a great job at Pepsi in the finance department. I was living at home, so didn't have rent and things of that nature. Did have a small student loan and things of that nature, but I was basically broke, like paycheck to paycheck. And that sounds ridiculous. Oh, fortunate me, I'm living at home and everything. But I was just going out, bars, spending money, buying stupid stuff, having a good time type thing. And then I was getting promoted over the years. I worked my butt off. I was going to school at night for my master's degree in business administration, so my MBA. So things cost a lot more, but I was like, hey, I'm getting a lot more money, nice promotions and pay raises, etc. But it was never enough. So it was just one of those things where I finally at 25, discovered like a cash flow statement, and I did it for myself. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's where the money's going. Did a net worth statement. And I was like, how can I be like, I think it was minus $4,000 or something at that age. And it shouldn't be that way given how much money I was making and everything like that. So it just started that kind of awareness period. And for me, I read a couple of books and then a lot of books on it. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm just blowing all my money and I got to start saving for the future.
So to get the listeners actionable steps, I like that you mentioned a miracle happened when you read some of these books. And there's three books you mentioned: Millionaire Next Door, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and The Automatic Millionaire. I think I would like it if
Yeah.
we could go one by
Just go
one
through.
and actually like describe what you took away from each of those.
Yeah, and at a high level, because I have to
Yep,
Google
yep.
like what are
Yeah.
the 7 takeaways from Millionaire Next Door. But the main one was, it was Millionaire Next Door, and you're like, oh, I wanted to be a millionaire. So of course you read the book. And for me, it was like really showing you what millionaires did and spent money on. So it wasn't the flashy cars and things like that. It wasn't necessarily a high income and you needed to like go up the corporate ladder, etc. They just did a great job of managing whatever money came in. They targeted market opportunities. One thing I do remember is a lot of them had their own businesses, so they were self-employed, or dry cleaners was a big thing in the book. And they did an update of the book recently as well. And so some of the things have changed, but it was really about that. It was like living below your means, and the fact that it is the millionaire next door who's a guy or girl you might look at and be like, they're not wealthy. They're living in a lower, like a middle class neighborhood. They might not have the best house on the block. They might not have the best car on the block. It might be 10 to 15 years old. You know, at the time, like watches, it might be like a plastic watch, things like that. So it just ingrained on me like, oh, wait a minute, I'm thinking about this differently. Because at work, you see all the high powered execs and they're dressed well and fancy cars and things like that. Then you're like, okay, that's what wealth is. And so that was the main thing for me. Like, oh, okay, it is living below your means. It's doing things differently. For me, I actually had a chance to go see David Bach live in a small like community college in the city, New York City. So he spoke, I forget how long, an hour or so. I had the book, he signed it for me, etc. So I had already been indoctrinated, but it was just the power of a couple of stories about like small dollar amounts that can add up to a lot if you invest them over time. And, it was the latte factor. So instead of buying your coffee, you make it at home instead of that muffin, etc. So his example in the book, I think it was like about $5, $5.50, that this one woman in the audience was like, I'm broke. And he's like, all right, well, take me through your day. And it was the spending cycle within 24 hours. So that's what I did too. I wrote down everything I spent my money on a little pad and pen, just to understand, okay, where's my money going? Nowadays with Mint and some other apps, things like that, it's just like automatic. If you just use a debit card or a credit card, you can, at your fingertips, you know where your money's going. So David's example was like, oh, okay. So she's like, I went to Starbucks, I bought my coffee, and I bought a muffin, and it was $5.50. And so then he just compounded that for 30 years and is like, that's over $1 million just from the latte factor. And that's where it came from. And so I was like, yeah, like, what am I doing? And so for me, it was some stupid expenses, like in the afternoon, like, snacks and things like that. So I started bringing those snacks to work, so I didn't have to buy them at work. You buy in bulk and things like that. And so then I just started doing that throughout. So that was really, for me, the Automatic Millionaire. I was already investing on my own. I was always obsessed with the stock market since I think about 11th grade in high school. So that part, I was like, okay, I'm doing it. So that's the second book. The third book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have read it, and heard about Robert Kiyosaki. For me, it was the idea that like a house isn't an asset, and it is an asset. Like I get that it actually bleeds you. You got to pay taxes, you got to pay maintenance and all this other stuff. So there is an upkeep, but it is an asset on a balance sheet. Like, sorry, Robert. But there is truth to being like, okay, buying too much house, buying something more than you could afford, and it financially constrains you. And it was actually the second book, The Cash Flow Quadrant, that he wrote that really clicked for me about cash flow, and really about passive income. I didn't necessarily take the advice and like I did start looking into real estate, but it just wasn't for me. Like I was looking at properties, cash flowing, some things, it was too high. So I was like, what, I'm doing well in the stock market. That'll be my vehicle. And that's what I tell people all the time. Find the vehicle that works for you, and go all in on it, learn it, and put it into practice. And for me, it was, equities in the stock market.
Awesome. So Fabio, like I said before, your tagline on Twitter is "Money ain't wealth." So how do you define wealth?
Yeah, it kind of came to me because every milestone I've hit in my life it's like, okay, you're a millionaire. Great. I think we celebrated with like a pizza party, like for my wife and I, like, it's like, okay, hey, by the way, hon, we hit it, big deal. But the next day I didn't feel any different. I still had to go to work and, listen to my boss or have something due. So like, okay, great. And then the next time, okay, multimillionaire. All right, you're worth 2 million on paper and stuff like that. But it's like, okay, well, what's changed here? Nothing. Like, I was still not in great shape. I had just started working out then, but there's different areas of wealth. And so that started me on this kind of not happy, just pursuing wealth kick, and like wanting self-development and meditation or trying to other things. And it crystallized for me, I think it was last year when I read an article about Tom Cruise. Like, it just was one of those things you scroll through and you see, and it was, and again, I don't know if it's fully true. I'm sure it is, but it basically said, this was Top Gun Maverick 2 had come out, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. He's like, look at him. He's 61. He's shredded, and he's worth $400-500 million, whatever. Everybody's like, Tom Cruise. But the article is all about his daughter, Suri doesn't talk to him. Like, they don't really have a great relationship. I was like, that sucks. Like, that's not cool. And then it just flooded my brain with other stories about like the top 10 billionaires in the world, how many times they were divorced. And some of them maybe not in the greatest shape. And I know Mark Zuckerberg, is famously right now, he's like shredded and doing like jujitsu and things like that, and getting in, shape. But the majority of them have been divorced. And I'm like, there's more to wealth than just financial. And whenever I looked at it and did a deep dive into research, there's actually five areas of wealth. The first one, obviously, everybody knows is finances, right? Like, okay, money. And that includes your career and how you're making money and all of that other stuff, investing, et cetera. So that's the wealth part that everybody understands. The next piece is faith, and they're in no particular order. Every person has their own values and what they, and I'll talk about seasons of life if you want, and like how you pursue one versus the other, because it's going to be very hard to do all five and be balanced. Okay. So I'll just read them off quickly. It's finances, it's faith, it's fitness, it's family, and it's fun. All right. So I always say them in the different order. I already did finances. Faith could be your religion. It could be your spirituality. It could be like your mindset. For me, it's more about the millionaire mindset. Like, and the book I always reference is The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by Harv Eker, T. Harv Eker, Eker. Just a phenomenal book about like rewiring your mental blueprints. And we can talk about that if you're interested. Then there's fitness. And so that's mental and physical. So it's like, okay, is what's up here really, geared up? Am I optimized? Am I groggy? How do my self-belief? Do I have too much imposter syndrome? So it's like really being physically, mentally fit. And then there's the physical side. Am I working out a couple of times a week, 4 or 5 times a week, three, 4, whatever? Am I getting enough rest? Am I, feeding my body and hydrating my body in the correct way, nutrition, et cetera? Because if you don't feel great, it doesn't matter how much money you have. And that's like what they say, like wheelchair wealth. Like, okay, great. You wasted 40 years of your life just grinding it, and now you're not healthy and you can't even enjoy it. Or some folks not healthy and you die early from whatever habits and stuff. There's the fun part of it. So that's just the thing I didn't do as much, and I regret a little bit. I know Gary Vaynerchuk has talked a lot about this, of like just grind, working on Saturdays and Sundays in the liquor store. It wouldn't have hurt him to take a weekend off, go to the Jersey Shore with his boys, and have a great time, right? Like, so that those are types of things that you can't take back. So it's experiences over stuff is the main way to say it. So with my kids, it's kind of like, instead of just buying stuff, like I'd rather do things with them that they'll remember. And I pause and I sit there. I'm like, okay, this is a fun thing. This is something they're going to remember, because I look back on my childhood and I look back on like my 20s and 30s, and I'm like, okay, well, what are the things that I most remember? And it could be a trip with the boys or the girls, like, that type of thing. It could be fun nights out and stuff like that. So it's important to do that. So again, finances, get that, squared away. The faith part of it, like the mental, spiritual, etc. The fitness side also includes mental. So it's like twice, and it's on purpose because it's that critical for it. And then the family part is the fifth part. It's probably the first part, or whatever you want to call it. These are the relationships that you have with your family, with your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, etc. So it's not just family but like the community aspect. Because if you look back at it, the top 5 regrets of people who are dying, that book and like that study, it's about relationships. No regrets about like, hey, no one is ever going to say I should have spent more time at the office, but they will say, okay, well, what made it a wonderful life? It's like the bonds that you have, and you don't need many. It's just a couple of like that you have your crew. I always call it the crew. That's like the family too. Of like, do you have a tight knit circle that keeps you excited and happy, that you feel loved? And so those are the 5 areas of wealth. So again, it's like the tagline says money ain't wealth. It should probably be money alone ain't wealth, but that's not as hooky and catchy.
Yes, I think that book you were describing that was touching on regrets at end of life is Taking Stock by Doc G. That was a great book.
Yeah.
And in terms of mental fitness, how do you kind of flex that muscle? How do we get mentally stronger?
Yeah, just put David Goggins on repeat in your head and for an hour. So that's the extreme of it. Like, when you sit there and you're like that kind of mental, like, it's not the positive thing, because David is so much more than that. But I always tell people that the books you consume, it's the information you consume is the main thing. But then it's like holistic. So you're going to feel better about yourself if you look better. So if you take care of your health and like that type of thing, great. Loving relationships with family, etc. So you don't have drama on that side. So you don't have that stress there. If you're taking care of your finances, you're not going to have as much stress. You have sleep at night. and that peacefulness, etc. But the side of like programming yourself and the mental side, it really is like that T. Harv Eker book of like the Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, and like your blueprints in your head, and he calls them like wealth files, like things that you go back to. It's getting rid of like the poor money scripts that you might have, taken on as a kid. It might be cleaning up your circle of friends, and saying, hey, like this isn't what I want out of life. It might be moving to another area that you can just have like a fresh start or something like that from. But for me though, it was a lot of books. I love to read. I love to write. And so I hundreds of books in the personal development and space and that type of thing. Positive podcasts as well, of like just interviews and people. And I would always just Google, oh, that person I heard is great, or that book. Let me hear the 60-minute or 30-minute version. YouTube videos, things of that nature. Just put them on repeat, etc. So those are like for me the main things that I have done. And years ago it was like Tony Robbins, like literally on repeat, commuting to work, the CDs in my car, like listening to it, and you just basically reprogramming yourself, and you realize, hey, most of what I'm encountering in life is a reflection of my thoughts that become feelings, that become, like emotions, that become actions, and become behaviors and habits. So it's just reprogramming your habits to be helpful instead of hurtful.
Is that what you mean by poor money scripts? Just like that negative self-talk? Is that kind of what you mean by that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so bad at it. Like I gotta write it down, and I want to write a book or a short report on this, because it's like Robert Kiyosaki is the one who kind of brought it to light, but I can't remember the gentleman's, I think it's like Klontz, Klontz. It's a father-son duo that really get into like deep money scripts, but it's just like, we can't afford it, or I'm not smart enough to make that money, or I'm not good at selling, or who the hell do I think I am? So it's a little bit broader than just money. It's just like my capabilities as a person to be, highly productive, as well as making a lot of money or selling. Hey, I can't afford that, or people that look like me don't do X, or it's easy for him to do that because he's this. So it's those types of things that as you're growing up, your parents, like the one for me is like, we're not Con Edison, close the lights, and it's just that's a famous one. It's like, wherever you live, like do that, or close the door, what do we live in a barn? And it's just, they're rooted in lack, or not having enough money to like not be wasteful, but it's things like that. The main one people remember, I can't afford that, or we can't afford that, or that's not for us, or it's for the folks on the hill, they can afford that, or we can't go away, and stuff like that. And those are the scripts that are running your head. And so until you actually realize it and address them and change them, whether that's through affirmations or kind of repetition and things of that nature, you're not going to change,
Awesome.
And that's actually in Ecker's book, not to keep talking about it, but I wrote a thread on it. I think it did really, really well. It was the 17 wealth files. And it just basically, why are some people rich and some people are poor? I started reading the book, and I came across, like, he basically went through 17 different, like, the rich think this, the poor think that, the rich think that, so like the rich buy assets, the poor buy stuff, so it was things like that. It's pretty cool.
As we're winding down, I like to ask every guest, what's the worst and best piece of money or personal finance advice that you've either heard or received?
Wow. I wasn't ready for that one. It's like, could be so long. I guess the best, it has to do with timing market versus timing the market. So, in periods of my life, I fall prey to it a little bit. I kind of did it in 2021 again, kind of just, hey, the market's going to rebound, let's put all the money in it, et cetera. And it's like, okay, it tanks, and you're like, oh. But the studies have shown that it's just being in the market, not being on the sidelines, that is what really is going to drive, your gains. And, Warren Buffett talks a lot about this. You can't time the market. Anybody that tells you that, then they're just BSing or trying to sell you something. That's why they don't believe in economic forecasts and things of that nature. It's the long-term view is the best way. Yeah, the worst piece of advice, I can't, something's not popping to my head, but it probably, what I would say to people is that it's the get rich quick type thing of like, hey, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Like, if a guru is showing you how his or her, like they're making millions in options or Forex trading or crypto, etc., that's probably not the truth, because they'd be doing that 24/7 and making millions versus trying to sell you a program or product for $27 to $69, or hey, come in my monthly Discord, and etc. And so I just like I've become very aware of people just posting their wins, you know, and be like, oh, look at this stock pick. It's like, okay, well, you had 4 others that sucked and you're not sharing that. So I'm just trying to bring awareness to that, and you know, that's why I recommend like index funds and things for the majority of people. You can have a side account. I called mine my Vegas account because of the mentality. I'm gambling and I could lose this. So it was a small portion of it. But you can hit it big. You know, you might invest in an Apple and Amazon, you know, some of these companies, like Tesla, you know, that take off, and you can retire off of one stock. So I'm mindful of that. And that's why I'm like, but do you have that mentality of the right to do that? Or you're like, look, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with my net worth and like a lot of money being tied up in one stock. Okay, just do index funds. It's the way to go.
Awesome. Well, Fabio, I've really enjoyed having you on and discussing. I love all the books you're mentioning. Why don't you tell the listeners where they can go to learn more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jack. Like, again, I'm not one of those guys that really has like a dialed in presence and website and all this other stuff. I'm mostly on Twitter, and it's F Marciano, Marciano, is where they can find me. I have a couple of like free reports that are coming out and things of that nature. So, you know, more to come on that. And you probably put a link into that, but one will be moneyaintwealth.com, you know, to play on that. And there's one that's actually in my bio right now. It's 925multimillionaire.com. So that's like the number 9 to 5 multimillionaire.com. And so it's a free report. It's just my story. I'm trying to just share it. I don't like talking about myself at all and like all that, but I know that that's what grabs people's eyeballs. And I'm here to hopefully get them into the right way to manage their money. So that's the goal here.
Awesome. Well, I think people will get a lot of value from this, and I greatly appreciate you coming out.
This is great. Thank you so much, man. Thank you for what you're doing and sharing this message, and like with the broader audience. This is what we need to like change people's financial lives.
Yeah.